Good morning and welcome to, you guessed it, Rising. I am here with Lynda Tran. Nice to see you again, Lynda.
Good to see you, Robby. Missed you.
How have things been?
Things have
last
been good.
week crossed paths.
Yep.
They've been good.
Excellent, excellent. Robby, there's so much going on though. I feel like I came back from the mountains and I'm getting bombarded. What is on your radar?
Happy to tell you. Yesterday on Rising, I talked a little bit about JD Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, in which he, in my view, rightly accused European leaders of turning their backs on cherished liberal European principles like free speech. That prompted CBS News' Margaret Brennan to bizarrely assert that free speech is what empowered the Nazis in the first place, a claim that, as I explained yesterday, is totally wrong and ahistorical. Nazi speech was actually vigorously censored in the 1920s. Weimar Germany did not suffer from a lack of attempts to shut down Nazi advocacy. It just didn't work. CBS's foray into pro-censorship arguments didn't just stop there, though. On Sunday, the network's evening news program, 60 Minutes, also ran an interview with 3 German prosecutors about their efforts to enforce censorship online. Now, we played a clip of that yesterday, and then Niall and I discussed it, but I actually had time to watch the entire segment yesterday, and it's actually even more pernicious than I thought, so I wanted to discuss it in greater detail. Let's watch a little bit more of, again, these 3 German prosecutors explaining to CBS reporter Sharon Alfonsi about how they arrest people for wrongthink. Watch this.
It's 6:01 on a Tuesday morning, and we were with state police as they raided this apartment in northwest Germany.
Hier ist die Polizei, wir mussten bitte mal mit Ihnen reden.
Inside, 6 armed officers searched a suspect's home, then seized his laptop and cell phone. Prosecutors say those electronics may have been used to commit a crime. The crime, posting a racist cartoon online. At the exact same time, across Germany, more than 50 similar raids played out. Part of what prosecutors say is a coordinated effort to curb online hate speech in Germany.
What's the typical reaction when the police show up at somebody's door and they say, hey, we believe you wrote this on the internet?
They say, in Germany we say, das wird man wohl doch mal sagen dürfen. So we are here with crimes of talking, posting on internet, and the people are surprised that this is really illegal to post these kind of words.
They don't think it was illegal?
No, they don't think it was illegal. And they say, no, that's my free speech. And we say, no, yeah, free speech as well, but it is also has its limits.
Those limits are quite limiting indeed. German police seize people's electronics for posting Nazi content, racist content, misinformation, gossip, and, get this, making fun of politicians. In fact, one of the textbook cases discussed in the interview concerned a politician who had a critic investigated by the police because they called him a bad name online. Watch this part of the interview.
It was a 2021 case involving a local politician named Andy Grote that captured the country's attention. Grote complained about a tweet that called him a Pimmel, a German word for the male anatomy. That triggered a police raid and accusations of excessive censorship by the government. As prosecutors explained to us, in Germany, it's okay to debate politics online, but it can be a crime to call anyone a Pimmel, even a politician.
So it sounds like you're saying it's okay to criticize a politician's policy, but not to say, I think you're a jerk and an idiot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Comments like, you're a son of a excuse me for using, but these words has nothing to do with political discussions or a contribution to a discussion.
Now, as an American, I am horrified by what I just watched. I hope you are too. It's insane that in an ostensibly free country, advanced liberal democracy like Germany, the police could go after you for calling a politician a dick. Just who do these bureaucrats think they are, trying to determine what does and does not count as lofty enough political debate? This is insane. What almost disturbed me even more was that CBS's reporter didn't seem particularly horrified at all. Sharon Alfonsi offered minimal pushback. At one point, she did suggest that surveilling citizens to this degree and prosecuting them for wrongthink was itself sort of Nazi-esque. But no one could accuse the segment of being overly critical of the German approach to online speech. And this is why Vance was right, absolutely right, to chide Europeans in his speech. If they want us to support them, they can't just betray fundamental free speech principles, and in particular, they can't apply their love of censorship to American tech companies. I'm sorry, but we did not beat Germany in 2 world wars so that some petty German bureaucrat can tell our social media platforms that dick jokes about politicians are illegal. That is not going to fly. So we discussed this yesterday on the program on Rising, and I had just seen a clip from this 60 Minutes interview. It was a big weekend for CBS and German speech policies, as it turned out. When you watch the whole interview, I mean, I was horrified watching it. Look, I get it's their country. They don't have the First Amendment. They can do things differently. But still, I'm like, oh my, they send police to people's doors to confiscate their phones for not just tweeting Nazi symbols, but you saw that, making jokes about politicians. That seems crazy to me.
Well, let me first start by saying I have a long time affiliation with CBS News. I happen to think CBS is a great network doing great work. But I see your point, Robby, about this particular incident in Germany. I don't want that, however, to overshadow the fact that they are also concerned about things like hate speech, Nazi values, and promoting and projecting things that would be, I think, objectively really bad for society. And I think that's where the debate really hinged. I saw the great conversation you and Niall had yesterday, and you said, you know, we have to be careful, it's not a slippery slope, but I think there's a pretty bright red line between certain things. In this particular case, and this is where I think it would apply in the United States, I think it is different when you're talking about a public official who has, by choice, decided to step into the public arena. They know that they are going to be scrutinized and potentially subject to criticism. That said, you know, it is problematic, I think, to say all speech should be okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can draw, you know, easy, bright lines, but imagine if Donald Trump was sending the police to go arrest people for, like, making fun of his appearance or something. I think liberals would have hysterical, hair-on-fire reaction, that justifiably, right? So the idea that the government could send around people to police speech on that level, and look, if people want to make the argument, as you just did, that we can draw distinctions, and there be certain categories of speech that are off limits. You know, our Supreme Court has settled that pretty decisively for our country, but new technology comes along, you have to adapt the rules. Fine. Let's say you want to have, if you're trying to sell me, I mean, I said this to Niall yesterday, if you're trying to sell me on the idea that this narrow category of speech should join defamation and incitement as something that you can't actually do, I would think you'd want to be very careful and say, yeah, we're just really going after abject, obvious Nazi hatred, incitement. But it's those people, the people enforcing it, seem like the people sitting on the other side of that desk. I don't trust them to just stop with that. They seem like they would go after anyone for saying anything that offends them.
Well, I don't know what's going on in Germany, but I do know what's going on.
Well, it's going to stay in Germany. It's not going to come here. That's what I'm saying.
I do know what's going on here. I mean, I think we are seeing similar interactions happening on social media on a regular basis. And I think ultimately it comes down to what kind of society do we want to be? I do think hate begets hate. I think role models matter. And I think the more we allow in terms of terrible opinions that are harming other people, that has a contribution to our society as well.
Tell us what you think. More Rising right after this. The talks between Russia and the U.S. on Ukraine and Saudi Arabia appear to have ended before they even began. They lasted just 5 hours.
Let's step back for a minute. This weekend, Secretary of State Rubio announced in Europe that talks to bring about peace would proceed without Ukraine at the table. This sent shockwaves throughout Europe and in Kyiv.
But after 4.5 hours, both sides agreed that it was an important first step. One aide told Politico that a summit between President Vladimir Putin and President Donald Trump is unlikely to take place next week, as still intensive work needs to be done.
Ukraine's leader, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, has said that any peace talks without his country's involvement won't bear fruit.
Here with us now to give us his assessment of this first meeting between Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio and what the future portends is retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure to be here, Robby.
So I know there was a lot of outrage from mainstream media about Ukraine being supposedly left out of these negotiations. Of course, but you know, my response to that was, well, but Zelenskyy has had every opportunity to speak to everyone in our government very regularly. top political leaders from both parties. There's no shortage of communications on the Ukrainian side between us and them. What there hasn't been for 3 years, apparently, was any communications between the U.S. and the Russian side, which is necessary for peace, no?
100%. Yeah, there's no question about that. That's been one of the, in my view, one of the biggest failures of the previous administration is that their abject unwillingness. In fact, you even had Secretary of State Anthony Blinken mock the idea of even talking to his counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. And if you're not talking to somebody, even if you hate them, then there's no possibility of finding any kind of possibility of common ground or any prospect of ending the war short of military confrontation on the ground. And as we certainly have come to conclude, there is no positive military outcome for the Ukraine side. The Western side tried everything in the world to do that short of sending its own troops in there. It failed. So then the only rational thing to do is to try to find a negotiated settlement, a diplomatic solution. And to do that, you have to talk to the other side.
You have to talk to the other side. Lieutenant Colonel, I think viewers at home would understand that it seems like it's a bit unusual not to have one of the parties to negotiation at the negotiating table. Could you give us a sense of how unusual this is or how common it is to have these kinds of conversations?
Yes, in one sense it is unusual, and it's certainly not intuitive. You would think that, of course, he would be at the table. But I have to say that I think that the Trump administration has concluded, because of the conversations that they have had with Zelenskyy, with some of the things he keeps saying in public, that they don't view him as a credible person with which to have negotiations, because you have Zelenskyy going on U.S. television, his own reporting that he comes out, his videos that he makes, and he's saying stuff like, I want nuclear weapons, I'm going to be in NATO, I'm not going to give up any territory. He literally said that 24 hours ago. And if you're telling the President of the United States that you won't accept any outcome that you don't approve, and he knows that all of the shots, as a matter of fact, Zelenskyy himself acknowledged in one of those interviews that he realizes that without the United States, they will lose quickly on the battlefield. With those power dynamics, then the idea that you should be at the table when you won't agree to any of the things that both the United States and Russia are agreeing to, then you would be an impediment to a negotiated settlement, not an agreement with it. And as unusual as it is, and as distasteful as I'm sure it is to many in Ukraine, if this is going to come to an end, it's going to have to really be between Russia and the United States first, and then Europe and Zelenskyy and everybody else second. Or, I'm telling you, here's the bad part, or the war will continue and eventually Russia will just seize by force of arms what it wants on the ground. That's the harsh reality that too few in the West acknowledge.
Yeah, I saw a poll yesterday that actually CNN discussed showing, increasing skepticism on the U.S. side among the U.S. people, actual voters, to continue supporting, unlimited financial assistance to Ukraine, the policy of the previous administration. Do you think Zelenskyy is he worrying that elections are going to be one of the sticking points in this negotiation? I know Russia said something to the effect that they want new elections in Ukraine that were suspended because of the war effort. Is Zelenskyy thinking about his own political future, rather than realistically focused on whether his country could possibly hold out in terms of the military effort?
Well, in my view, he has been disconnected from the combat reality for quite a long time now, because by all rights, this war should have been negotiated at an end in Istanbul in 2022. And then if they didn't want to do that, then it definitely should have been done after the 2023 offensive that the Ukraine side tried, where it was about a half a year's worth of attempts to break through the Russian side and force them out, an abject failure to even get through the first of 5 Russian defensive lines. That's when the Ukrainian leaders should have recognized reality and said, we have to get a negotiated settlement to save as much as we can. Instead, he continued prosecuting the war, and now then they are where they are. You had Secretary Rubio today in one of his comments specifically addressing that point you made. He said Trump is not interested in having a forever war and just continuing funding this war, it just ad nauseum, with no strategy, with no end state even in mind. And so I think that he's very clearly signaling this war is going to come to an end pretty soon, and it's going to be a negotiated settlement. And Zelenskyy will be forced then to either accede to that and to go accomplish whatever is agreed to by the two major powers, or he's going to be left on his own and he'll have to fight however he wants to. And that's, again, it's an ugly situation, but that's the reality.
So hearing your critique of the discussions or lack thereof to date over the past few years since the invasion in 2022, when would you say it is appropriate to bring Ukraine to the table, if not now?
I think as soon as Russia and the United States can come to some agreements on the important issues and the stickiest ones, which are where what territory has to be exchanged, where the lines will be, and what the conditions will be afterwards. And those are still some really difficult situations. That there is still a big gap between what the U.S. and what the Russians want. And it's still is undetermined whether they're going to be able to close that gap, because if they can't, again, Russia has shown consistently throughout all 3 years of this, really you can go back even before the war started, that while negotiations are going on, they are going to continue with their military forces. And then our side is going to be left with, how far do you try to hold out before you get a deal if the conditions on the ground keep moving to the west, which is happening even as we speak today. So that's the real problem. And because until those are negotiated and discussed or agreed upon by the two sides, then there's nothing to even bring either Europe or Zelenskyy in on. So there's a lot of difficult work to go on there, and this could get worse.
Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Always my pleasure, Robbie. Thank you.
Up next, the cuts keep on coming. What's the latest target? We'll tell you. Stay tuned. President Donald Trump's administration continues to take an axe to federal agencies.
Among the agencies the administration is targeting as of late include the Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the IRS.
And in a good sign for the Trump team, it's looking like federal judge Tanya Chutkan might rule in their favor.
Around 1,200 NIH employees have been fired, per the New York Times. 2 CDC programs were significantly cut. One tries to develop PhD lab scientists, while the other helps public health grads and get gigs in local health departments. 700 have been fired at the FDA as well. And as the Times notes, the kinds of health agency workers who were fired include grant proposal administrators, analysts, and scientists. Dr. David Fleming, chairman of an advisory committee to the CDC director, told the Times, quote, "It seems like a very destructive strategy to fire the new talent at an agency and the talent that's being promoted. A lot of energy and time has been spent in recruiting those folks, and that's now tossed out the window."
In response, an HHS spokesperson said HHS is following the administration's guidance and taking action to support the president's broader efforts to restructure and streamline the federal government. This is to ensure that HHS better serves the American people at the highest and most efficient standard.
Cuts at the FAA also has Democrats voicing their concerns. Several hundred have already been fired only weeks after a deadly plane crash over the Potomac in D.C.
There was also a Delta plane crash in Toronto yesterday. We have some of that to put up on screen now. The plane flipped over as it was landing, and there's video footage of that is available, and caught fire. Luckily, no one was killed in the accident. There are, of course, injuries. Now, Judge Chutkan might rule that all of these cuts are in fact legal. She wrote on Monday, "The court can't act based on the media reports. We can't do that. The things that I'm hearing are concerning indeed and troubling indeed, but I have to have a record, and I have to make a finding on the facts before I issue something."
Substacker and podcaster Wajahat Ali wrote on X, "Another airline crash. So many casualties and crashes over the past month. It's almost as if we should have had an FAA chief, head of TSA, and not put a freeze on qualified air traffic controllers. But hey, President Musk wants more of the pie, so Trump will give it to him. Good luck, Americans." Using a more sarcastic tone, if you can believe it, historian Kevin Cruz wrote on Blue Sky, "The FAA firings will continue until they stop all these planes from crashing."
But here was analyst Scott Jennings on CNN last night.
There are 45,000 employees at the FAA. We're talking about fewer than 400 people, and he says 0 air traffic controllers and critical safety personnel were let go. So if that's true, I don't really have a problem with it, to be honest with you. I do like the idea of keeping the people who are in the direct chain of command of safety and the air traffic control system and so on and so forth. But I have a hard time believing that there is a single government agency that doesn't have a bloat of administrative personnel that we could probably do without.
Radio host Andrew Wilco wrote on X, "Government workers are protesting because their jobs may be cut if they aren't doing anything useful, but by being out of the office to protest, they're proving they aren't doing anything useful and that their jobs should, in fact, be cut. Look, I'm always open to arguments that whatever is being cut is the wrong thing, but then I want to hear, well, what are you going to cut instead? Because we spend way too much money and our government is very bloated, and the services that agencies like Health and Human Services and Education render are not very cost-effective anyway, despite all the money we spend on them and all the federal employees we have to manage them. On the FAA thing in particular, I will say, look, okay, I'm open to being persuaded that we should not make cuts here and whatever, we need more FAA people, not fewer. But there's no evidence the recent crashes are due to problems with the FAA or a lack of employees there. For instance, I mean, the most recent crash took place in Canada, so that's not our FAA, obviously, and we don't know that the one in DC had to do with that. It sounds to me like there were already known problems about flying helicopters so close to planes over the Potomac, and that maybe we shouldn't be doing that, but that it was not specifically because there was not enough FAA oversight over it. Open to being wrong, but I think it's I think it's putting the cart before the horse, as some liberal commentators are doing, to say that it's the FAA is the reason we've had 3 plane crashes in a few weeks.
Look, Robby, I think we have to be very, very careful about making any sort of sweeping statements about what happened at National Airport just a few weeks ago and that tragedy. And also, it's, to be fair, too soon to tell what's going on in Toronto. Our FAA does have a connection, though, of course, to the international airspace and is, in fact, supporting some of the investigation that's happening on the ground in Canada now with the NTSB and the Canadian version of the NTSB. Yeah. Set that all aside. Here's the thing about the FAA and these firings. They are much like every other agency that we've witnessed over the last few weeks here. It's happening like a sledgehammer. It's not as if they are being very particularly careful about who they're pulling out. I mean, just to give you a sense of who they are letting go of in this particular moment, some of them are, in fact, very closely tied to safety, right? You're talking about mechanical inspections type people, safety specialists, people who are program analysts to make sure that those taxpayer dollars that we want put to good use are being done so. So I think Scott Jennings' comment there about, hey, the actually 48,000 employees at the FAA, none of the safety-related ones are being impacted here. The broad mission of the Federal Aviation Administration is first and foremost always safety. And so when you talk about recruitment and you talk about the development of people there, it's all geared towards that as part of the culture. And it's part of the reason why anytime you see something like this happening, it's very, very troubling. Zoom out even bigger and look at things like the cuts at the CDC, scientists. Those types of people are the people who, by the way, help keep us safe during a pandemic. And we've got an avian flu right now doing we don't know what. So I think all of this is very troubling. And it's not to say that we shouldn't be looking at the federal government, looking for efficiencies, looking for reforms. I just don't think we should just be hacking willy-nilly at members of the civil service without knowing what those impacts are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you say that, but I have concerns that very reckless NIH funding is what caused the pandemic in the first place, the total lack of oversight and accountability for the myriad grants granted by not just NIAID, but also now I learn USAID was also making grants to the same organization, EcoHealth Alliance, that purported to do unsafe research on bats in Wuhan, China, not even under the auspices of NIAID and the health officials. It was now being done through this additional agency. That's why I say there's just way too much spending on projects that are not well known to the actual leader of the federal government, that are not well understood by the American people, and significant cuts have to take place. Are they happening exactly the right way that I would want them to happen? I guess not, but if you're at least someone of my ideological predilection, it would feel weird for me to second guess or naysay what is the first serious effort to actually rein in reckless government spending in my lifetime. Now, it should be done by Congress, because if Congress has appropriated money to spend and the executive decides just not to spend it, that actually can't happen. It's supposed to go back to Congress, and then they can do rescission to make sure it's not spent. They should absolutely do that, and it should be structural rather than at random. And then you got to, rehire people like they're trying to rehire people in the terms of nuclear safety, I believe, that they laid off inadvertently. Yeah, that's not good. I hear that. But on the whole, the presumption should be, why do you deserve your government job paid for by taxpayers. Why are you entitled to that job? What are you doing that is in the public benefit? Not a presumption the other way. They're like, oh, all these people are so important, so necessary. Can't part with even a single government employee? Because that's how then you end up cutting nothing. Then you end up growing government, as every other Republican administration has done in the course of my lifetime, despite pledging to reduce the size of government.
So, Robby, I think if you care about accountability and you care about checks and balances, then you don't go in and do things like fire inspector generals. I also think if you care about the future of health programming and policy in this country, you don't gut the very talent pipeline that's going to make sure to keep Americans safe over the long run. Again, I think that wanting to reform government, wanting to make more efficient processes, making sure that taxpayer dollars are spent appropriately is a great idea. But of course, the irony of all these willy-nilly firings and dropping in people who've never worked in government to try and interpret what they think is mission critical, which is related to public safety, having these kinds of people making decisions is actually causing greater inefficiencies, as you point out, the National Nuclear Security Administration, them firing really critical people and now hopefully trying to get them back in quick order.
Coming up on Rising, MAGA World is blasting Tom Hanks. Find out why. We'll discuss. Saturday Night Live is facing backlash for a sketch their cast performed this weekend.
The show brought back a character from 2016, an apparently racist Trump supporter.
Take a look.
Now, speaking of church, can I say something? If more folks went to church, we wouldn't be in this mess we're in now.
You know what? I agree with you, Doug. I'd like to shake your hand, sir. Here we go.
No,
oh, no. Oh, no. It's just a handshake. Yeah, it's just a handshake. Yeah, all right. You're welcome in Black Jeopardy anytime.
All right. Well, thank you, my brother. Maybe I'll start a show for you to come on, and we'll call it What Jeopardy?
No. We don't need it. We don't need it. But slow it down a little bit, Doug.
Doug's character had actually first appeared in 2016. Here's a clip.
What is Tyler Perry's Boo a Medea Halloween?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, when that man puts on a moo-moo, I'm just transported.
You know, I got to tell you, I love those movies. I bought a box set at Walmart, and if I can laugh and pray in 90 minutes, that is money well spent.
Oh, you know what, sir? I really appreciate you saying that. I like that. I really do. Oh, no, it's all good. Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. Trust me, it's all good. Okay, yeah, it's all good. Okay.
Conservatives filled X with reactions. Political commentator Meghan McCain wrote, Tom Hanks always wanted to pretend he's the likable everyman, but he's as hate-mongering of regular Americans as any host on MSNBC. Good luck becoming less and less culturally relevant by the second, bro. Mario Knopfel, internet personality and founder of crypto and blockchain advisory firm IBC, wrote, Hollywood still doesn't get it, portraying Trump supporters as racist caricatures while he's winning record minority support. SNL's trying 2016 jokes in 2025. And professor at Boyce College, Denny Burke, wrote, I'll be honest, what makes this clip so difficult to watch is that it's Tom Hanks, who otherwise is a national treasure, just not used to seeing this kind of mean-spirited cynicism from him. Also, it's not funny. Now, look, I did not actually watch this skit. I don't usually watch SNL. I, in full disclosure, don't find SNL particularly funny. One of the last and only SNL skits I can remember actually laughing at was the original Tom Hanks skit, which, contrary to what many conservatives are saying here, was actually not designed to portray some Trump supporters as racist. The purpose of the skit was actually to show what a white Trump supporter and certain black people might actually have in common. It was like the opposite of woke or belittling of Trump people. In fact, it was liberal people who misunderstood it, and it was well liked by and well regarded by conservatives. I don't know if this newer skit featuring the same Tom Hanks character is more in line with that, or if it's more offensive to the right. I don't know because I didn't watch it. But given that so many people on the right were misjudging the initial skit as well, I'm not trusting them to actually have seen the humor here.
Well, fortunately, Robby, I find SNL funny enough for the both of us.
Oh.
And not surprisingly,
Yes.
we have a second Trump administration, and they're seeing a resurgence. I mean, who can forget Alec Baldwin portraying Donald Trump during his
Not
first
funny.
years? Well, you know, it's funny to certain people. I think, though,
I would rather watch paint dry.
bigger picture, we do have to find a way to laugh at ourselves. Everything that's happening on a day-to-day basis, whether it's this administration or the previous one or the one before that, is pretty serious. And I think political comedy has a real and meaningful role in our society. I mean, I obviously, as a Barack Obama alum and fan, I loved it when he used to go on these late night shows and make fun of himself. I mean, this is part of something I feel like would be healing for this country if we could just get back to laughing at ourselves a little bit more.
I did not think Alec Baldwin's Trump was funny at all. I'm trying to think of the name of the guy. Daryl Hammond played Trump before him. I liked that impression better. I thought that one was funnier. You know, I liked SNL during the Amy Poehler, Tina Fey, Kristen Wiig era. What's her name who plays Hillary Clinton is first it was Amy Poehler, and then it was her name is escaping me, but she's Kate McKinnon.
Yes.
She's funny and talented. A lot of them are funny and talented. I just haven't laughed at it a lot lately, except the guy who does the George Washington impression, talking about all the different weights and measures that America will have. If you've seen the clip, you know what I'm talking about. It's actually quite funny. A lot of people in my family like watching it. It's just
not your cup of tea.
Not my cup of tea. Of course, they're celebrating a big 50-year anniversary, right? Actually, the skit was probably part of their big 50th show, which, again, I didn't watch any of, but I saw, everyone from John Hamm to Larry David was involved in. I mean, some of those people are amusing to me.
Yeah, look, I think it's all funny, but I think the bigger point of it all is to remind us that we have more in common than we have that's different.
Do we?
We do. We all ultimately want to be able to laugh at the world and find some joy and poke fun at it. The other thing is Saturday Night Live has had this great legacy, I think in part because it actually makes people pay attention to what's happening in current events when their ordinary everyday lives may draw them away from it.
All right, I'll take your word for it, Lynda. Next up, journalist Matt Taibbi will be joining us to discuss a sneaky last-minute move by the Biden administration. Stay tuned. President Donald Trump and his administration have certainly started rooting out what they see as government waste.
Elon Musk's Doge, for instance, has been scouring various agencies for funds they deem to be useless or excessive. In fact, the Trump administration is currently in a legal battle over a federal funding freeze. A federal judge set a 5-day deadline for Trump to unfreeze USAID funding Friday, for instance.
Unfortunately for the Trump administration, there also appears to be significant amounts of funding the Biden administration approved at the last second. Journalist Matt Taibbi has a new piece titled The EPA's Incredible $20 Billion Caper Explained, where he breaks down just such an instance. He starts off by alluding to a statement from Trump's EPA chief, Lee Zeldin.
Roughly $20 billion of your tax dollars were parked at an outside financial institution by the Biden EPA. This scheme was the first of its kind in EPA history, and it was purposefully designed to obligate all of the money in a rush job with reduced oversight.
Taibbi writes in his piece, I get the controversy over the means of the incoming administration's cuts, but even I'm shocked at how bottomless the waste problem appears to be and how valiantly the entire machinery of Washington is rallying to the cause of budget horse. Joining us now to discuss is Matt Taibbi. Welcome back to Rising.
Thanks for having me, Robby.
Yeah, it's always great to have you on the program. So much of this I think is unsurprising. Of course, Biden's administration tries to tie Trump administration's hand by approving at the last minute a number of things that they're now trying to unwind. What did you make of what Lee Zeldin was saying there?
So it's a fascinating little twist to the whole thing because there is a legitimate controversy over whether or not the president has the discretion to just cut things or not spend things that are obligated by Congress. I think the Constitution is actually, there's sort of a gray area there, but I think there's a real legal argument to be made. But in advance of that, the EPA essentially moved $20 billion of money that was allocated as part of the Investment Reduction Act, and not having a place to actually send it yet. They just moved it to a designated financial agent, which was Citibank, kind of in purgatory specifically so that the Trump administration couldn't touch it. So they were in advance kind of getting around this whole Doge problem, which is a fascinating thing. And for me, it was interesting because I had covered a very similar story decades ago in Yeltsin's Russia involving a thing called authorized banks. So it's a unique thing that they're doing.
And we're seeing, for instance, with USAID, all of this spending on all sorts of programs that the American people have no knowledge of, that the executive, the leader of the branch that has all the agencies that allocate this funding has no knowledge of. Some of these things are, of course, in legitimate national security interests or were clearly designated by Congress for these purposes. Other are, I think, a bit harder to justify, or then it's like, why is this agency doing it? I'm still struggling to understand why, for instance, like research funding in Wuhan, China was going through USAID in addition to the National Institutes of Health. Like, why isn't that all under the same agency? But of course, canceling it all or firing, huge numbers of people, and then they have to invite other people back to work. That, looks crazy and chaotic, and I wish they would do it maybe a different way. But of course, we've had, for decades, so many Republicans come into Washington and say, we're going to cut funding, we're going to reduce the size of government, and they do nothing. In fact, they grow government. So we've never seen this level of effort actually put toward what Republicans have promised they're going to do my entire lifetime.
Yeah, and I think you're accurately getting at the dilemma here, which is that we have had politicians come into office and promise to cut the budget, but instantaneously they slide into the same old patterns, and ultimately you end up getting a bigger budget in the end. Even under Trump, that happened. Frankly, with the Defense Department, he gave them record increases. And what you're talking about, where you're unable to even find who the contractor is or who's actually doing the work. Remember, that's a systemic problem. The Department of Defense has been unable to be audited for decades now. They literally cannot do that job. So it's a serious problem. There's just money flying out the door. And this EPA story is kind of a microcosm of all of them wrapped into one, because it's $20 billion that was earmarked for a general project to distribute community climate research. But they haven't really even found the projects yet or even been pitched. They're just moving the money to an area where they will eventually kickstart programs, which is as vague as you can possibly get, I think, for that amount of money.
Yeah, Matt, I'm not familiar with the EPA program or the budget piece that you're talking about there, but I am aware that the Biden administration, much like many other administrations before it, did a lot of pushing out of resources in those final weeks in office. And I guess the fundamental question is that always wrong, or is that something that is okay under certain circumstances? There's that old saying, right, that you're president until you're not. So every moment that you're in office, you're doing the work of the taxpayers and you're doing the carrying out the vision that you have for your administration. I mean, I guess the question is, what sort of parameters should you really have here?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're difficult questions. I would argue that specifically moving the money out just so that it can't be unspent, that gets a little difficult. My understanding, talking just on background to some folks about this, is that there might ultimately be a legal question here about the intent of the transaction. It's not the transaction itself is clearly legal, and as you say, this is done kind of routinely. In other words, at the end of the year, spending all the money that you need to, among other things, because some departments depend on amounts of money spent to calculate the projections for their coming budget. So if you don't spend at the end of a fiscal year, you're going to have a lower budget the next year. So this happens sort of routinely. But in this case, they had this weird video from Project Veritas where you have a guy who's sitting there drinking a cocktail talking about how, we got to toss these gold bars off the deck of the Titanic, so that before the Trump administration comes in. I think that might be looked at differently, both ethically and legally, than simply rushing to spend money so that it isn't wasted, right, in the end, so that the program survive. That feels a little different to me.
Before we let you go, Matt, just want to quickly get your thoughts on what we've been talking about quite a lot on Rising last 48 hours, and I know I saw you commenting on it on X as well. This kind of really tremendous expose on German censorship efforts, or police being sent to people's homes. 60 Minutes doing a story on this, a conversation with German prosecutors describing their efforts to actually arrest people, or at least confiscate their electronics for sharing hate speech or even just insults of politicians online. It was pretty eye-opening for me. What did you make of that?
It was amazing. Obviously, I've spent years now working on this exact issue, and one of the things I've been trying to raise awareness about is just exactly how crazy it's gotten overseas. The specific law in Germany is called NetzDG, the Network Enforcement Act, but there's also a superseding law called the Digital Services Act. There are similar laws in the UK. And in Germany, they will send 6 armed people to your door to burst in and collect your electronics, your phone, your laptop, and other items for things as silly as calling somebody like a weenie, basically. There's some other things that are more like hate speech offenses, but even that it's all stuff that we would consider protected speech here in the United States. And 60 Minutes did a feature which seemed to be very admiring of this program, and I think it kind of landed like a lead balloon. It felt crazy to me. It felt like propaganda for that kind of thing.
Indeed. Matt Taibbi, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Next up, Jen Psaki is blasting the Democrats. We'll discuss. Stay tuned. It's like a punchline to a bad joke. Just how bad are the Democrats doing? So bad that even former Democratic strategists are mocking them, including former Biden White House press secretary and current MSNBC host Jen Psaki, who had this to say about her party on her podcast. Let's watch.
So one of the things, and this is, I always laugh when people call me a Washington insider, which maybe I am, but because I feel like I grew up in politics, like working on political campaigns. And which drives me crazy is the way sometimes Democrats talk. It drives me insane. It's like we're in a PhD thesis on political academia, which is not how you win elections. You said, it's like so funny because I wrote it down. Democrats talk like we are adjunct professors at a small liberal arts college of the Midwest, which I'm sure I would love a small liberal arts college of the Midwest, but like, that's not how most people talk. And I've noticed this since even hosting a show. Like I'll have people on and you're like, are you reading from a sheet of talking point? I'm asking you about the threat to our country of this and you're talking about something else.
Former Biden ambassador to Japan and current CNN political commentator Rahm Emanuel agreed with Jen Psaki. Let's watch.
There's a way of using terminology, but you're right. A lot of people, Democrats, we love people to know that we're smart and that we got our PhD and here we're ready to show you our thesis. And it comes across not only that it's a self-enclosed conversation, it is tremendously dismissive of them, the audience. We're actually talking to ourselves about how important, how smart we are, rather than how to make sure that they understand. We're more interested in the sound of our own voice.
And the Young Turks host Anna Kasparian had this to say on Friday about the Democratic Party. Let's watch.
Listen, no one is stupid enough to think that Democrats have a modicum of power right now. They don't. They have no power right now. We all understand that. But how about take a look at the behavior of Republicans when they are not in power? You want to know what they do? They don't shut up, okay? They're doing press conferences. They're doing congressional hearings. They're repetitive. Again and again, the Hillary Benghazi thing. Every single day, Hillary Benghazi, Hillary Benghazi, Hillary Benghazi. Democrats, though, they cower. They cower. And then they tell their own supporters, shut up. There's nothing we can do because we don't have enough power. And then what they'll say is, we need to have control of Congress. And then everyone will get out the vote, they'll organize, they'll canvass, they'll fight real hard to ensure Democrats have the majority in Congress in both the lower chamber, Senate. And guess what they do with that power? Nothing. That's what Biden had. And then it was excuse after excuse after excuse for why they can't get their own agenda accomplished.
Well, Lynda, you're a Democratic insider as well. Are you
Am
not?
I? I was also a campaigner. Thank you very much, Jen Psaki.
Jen Psaki was White House press secretary. She's like, oh, I guess I'm a Washington insider. I think you're an insider, babe.
I think you got a point there, Robby.
This happens all the time, though. I listen to Democratic political figures concede that their party is out of touch with working class people. There's almost a trope at this point. We hear this all the time. There's endless discussion of it, admission of it. It'd be weirder, frankly, to hear a Democrat say there's no problem with the way we talk down to people. They're always saying there is clearly a communications problem with how we reach out to ordinary people, and that our cultural predilections or progressive social cultural values are in some way toxic or off-putting to ordinary folks. That is, I think, well established, but then that is never operationalized into an actual new strategy.
You know what I think the fundamental problem is, and I feel like I can say this as the Democrat sitting at the table. Yeah. I think the problem is we all agree that Democrats failed to connect with working people, working families this last cycle, and probably the last several, if we're being really honest with ourselves. The problem is the leaders of the party typically say, yeah, it's everybody else that's doing that, it's not me. And so candidly, this is what I've been saying to folks on my team, which is that we all have to be doing a better job of listening, and we also have to be honest with ourselves about where we individually have failed to meet the moment. And then I think at that point, you can move on. There's one thing I will say, though. I do not agree with Ana Kasparian that Democrats are throwing up their hands and saying there's nothing we can do, we're not in power. Clearly the deck is stacked against us. But what I hear Democrats saying is you have the power. You as citizens have the power. You need to be out protesting. You need to be out organizing in your own communities and talking to your members of Congress, be they Democrats or Republicans, about what you actually need and care about.
But there's not... Okay, but you have to concede there's not very much protesting going on right now. There's not, compared to the first Trump administration, there's not millions of people in the streets. I mean, I suspect that's the case because they remember doing that the first time and it having very little effect on the trajectory of the Trump administration. I think there is more just resignation to, okay, it's Trump won, it's his term to do whatever he wants. I'm not hearing again, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not privy to these meetings. I'm certainly not hearing much of a strategy from Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi. Maybe there's more of a plan among activist groups or communications firm. I saw, was it The Atlantic or Semaphore? I think it was The Atlantic. Maybe it was covered in Semaphore, but it was The Atlantic, hosting a kind of Democratic strategy session with like podcasters to help explain to Democrats how to communicate better or compete in the environment that Republicans and Trump have been so successful in, the kind of podcast milieu. That was just taking place last week or something like that. That suggests to me that they're still trying to find the answer to how to communicate with people better.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two different debates going on here and two very important ones. One is about overall message, overall mission, values of the party, and how to connect with voters. That's one discussion. The other discussion, which I think is more what's happening here with the podcasts and what you're describing, is how does the Democratic Party combat what it sees as the massive Republican conservative media infrastructure, which includes everything from Fox News to the Joe Rogans of the world and many other content creators, which is an entirely, I think, steeper hill to climb for Democrats. I think all of this is very important, but doesn't get away from the fact that there still needs to be a different kind of movement, a different kind of policy set to connect with people. The last thing I'll say is that in the first round of Trump, you saw the resistance because it was organic, and I think it was really about two things: a reaction to the man, which I think feels personal, and also that it felt like the election was stolen that go around. I think this time Democrats are trying to be more strategic, more thoughtful. You're seeing a lot of legal strategery, as it were, for example, and I think it requires that in this moment.
I mean, the content creator set of people moving to the right and becoming much more favorable to Trump or being a successful vehicle for Trumpism, that is an organic phenomenon in and of itself, right? There was always Fox News, there was always conservative media organizations, but so much of this veering in a right direction is just I think a mix of people genuinely coming to hold those views of the content creators themselves, finding audiences that are receptive to those views, and then maybe modifying or leaning more in that direction. It is fascinating, but I do think it even if there's an acknowledgement, as I kind of said earlier, of that they've been talking to people the wrong way, there's not a willingness enough to actually change. Like I was listening to Ken Martin, the new head of the DNC, being interviewed on MSNBC sometime in the last 48 hours. Everything is blending together lately. And they asked him.
Long day.
Yeah. Oh, tell me about it. And they showed him a poll of where the American public was at on there only being two genders listed on government documents, and majority of the public clearly agrees with that. That that's a Trump initiative to make the government forms just say man or woman, and it has massive public support. And they asked Ken Martin about that, and he immediately pivoted to, well, voters are so concerned about inflation, and Trump promised to do something about it, but he's going to make inflation worse, and he's not doing. And they're like, okay, but you didn't answer the question. We showed you a poll saying most of the American people disagree with the progressive left on this issue. Is that a problem? And he was like, well, I don't decide what goes on the... Like, he's still not addressing it. He could just say, yeah, we should abandon that position because it's unpopular with the American people. Or he could say, I don't care that the American people feel that way because what's right is right and they're wrong about that and we're going to continue to advocate for it. But he's just like ignoring it.
Right. I mean, I think what he's trying to do, I didn't see this interview, obviously, but I think what he's trying to do is focus on the big picture, the price of eggs, the impact of the current economy on people's kitchen table discussions and their wallets, which I think is generally, by the way, good advice for both sides of the party.
Well, I don't know. I think focusing on what the government gender IDs say is good for the Republican Party, in addition to, yes, of course, talking about kitchen table issues, which Trump did, the price of eggs and food and all that. We still hope that is going to be addressed with some sane economic policies. Next up on the show, left-wing pundit Mehdi Hasan and Vice President JD Vance got into a spat on X. We're going to discuss. The debate over free speech in Europe is continuing to take place on social media, with left-leaning pundit Mehdi Hasan laying down the gauntlet to Vice President JD Vance over on X.
He wrote on X, "Open invite to the Vice President to come on my show and do an interview with me about the state of free speech in the U.S. and Europe. He won't accept, of course, as he has a safe space on Fox. But I'm making the offer anyways in the name of free speech and free debate."
Regarding this debate over free speech, JD Vance had this to say. "Yes, dummy, I think there's a difference between not giving a reporter a seat in the White House press briefing room and jailing people for dissenting views. The latter is a threat to free speech. The former is not. Hope that helps."
The back and forth didn't end there. Hasan responded, "Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for taking time out of your busy schedule to call me names. But your boss, Elon Musk, just called for a, quote, long prison sentence for CBS journalists for edits he didn't like. Did you not get the memo? Do you agree with Mr. Musk on locking up us TV journos?" Then there was this tweet. Here's Musk calling for the jailing of American journalists because of their apparently dissenting views, aka edits to a TV interview that he didn't like.
Mehdi Hasan was referring to this tweet by Elon on February 16th. 60 Minutes are the biggest liars in the world. They engage in deliberate deception to interfere with the last election. That was referencing the sit-down interview that 60 Minutes did with Kamala Harris. CBS was sued and released the unedited transcript. There was general consensus that the edits were only to clean up the vice president's speech, not alter the context of what she said. I do not agree with that. I think it did alter the context. Meanwhile, Mehdi Hasan got himself in some hot water for a tweet he put out and then removed, which said that American planes crash again. Make American planes crash again. That was a tweet he had that was really bad and he deleted. Full disclosure, I despise Mehdi Hasan. I dislike him so intensely. I think he is one of the most brutally unfair people involved in media. I would be willing to go on just about anyone's show, podcast thing to have a debate or a discussion with people I disagree with. I would absolutely not participate in any such conversation with Mehdi Hasan because he operates in total and complete bad faith. If I were JD Vance, I would totally ignore him. I wouldn't even spar with him. There's no point. I forgot what else I was going to say.
Well, instead of ignoring him, though, he used what my youngest would call the D word, which is kind of astonishing in and of itself.
I mean, it's illegal in Germany, but we're finding out.
It just might be.
I remember what I wanted to say. So Mehdi Hasan criticized Vance for only saying he'd be unwilling to, come into an unfriendly media environment and actually debate me, bro. He wouldn't leave his safe space of Fox News. That's not fair to JD Vance at all. JD Vance does tons of confrontational, oppositional media. He's done interviews with Margaret Brennan on CBS. He's done interviews with the mainstream media all the time. He does a good job. He comes off quite well in them. But you can't accuse him of not, wanting to mix it up with journalists or media people who he disagrees with. That's not true of Vance whatsoever.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Robby. But look, this is what Mehdi got out of this exchange. He got the sitting vice president of the United States to respond to his controversial or antagonizing tweet there, or X post. I have to get used to saying that. And that's a win for him no matter what. They're engaged in this back and forth, which is quite astonishing. And his larger point is, you're the sitting vice president of the United States. Why are you engaged in this conversation with me at all? There are many other important things for you to be thinking about.
I don't like him because he was so unfair for a number of reasons. I thought he was pathologically unfair to actually a guest we had on the program today, Matt Taibbi, whom they used to be of a somewhat similar ideological bent, and he was so dismissive of Matt Taibbi's work to expose what I thought were real abuses of government overreach in how they communicated to social media firms to crack down on dissenting COVID opinions. I've also clashed with Mehdi over his defenses of Fauci at all costs, saying right-wing people were crazy for criticizing Fauci. And I'm like, I'm not even criticizing his guidance necessarily, which I think is wrong, but isn't it fair to scrutinize the funding and all of that? And he was just totally, again, bad faith, pretending that his enemies were making no valid points. So
yeah, clearly it's his persona.
Yeah. All right. Coming up next on Rising, does Elon Musk have a new baby? I think Elon Musk and Nick Cannon are going to single-handedly repopulate the entire planet. We will discuss. Stay tuned. Just like Elon Musk's rockets, love is in the air. Or is it?
Over the weekend, internet personality Ashley St. Clair made a stunning announcement.
In a statement uploaded to X, she wrote, 5 months ago, I welcomed a new baby into the world. Elon Musk is the father. I have not previously disclosed this to protect our child's privacy and safety, but in recent days, it has become clear that tabloid media intends to do so, regardless of the harm it will cause.
This is Musk's 13th child, and St. Clair is the 4th woman to mother one of Musk's kids.
Musk has been relatively silent on the matter. He did tweet about it briefly, though. He responded to a screenshot of a now-deleted St. Clair tweet from 2020 that right-wing political commentator Milo Yiannopoulos had uploaded. Yiannopoulos accused St. Clair of plotting to ensnare Musk for half a decade. St. Clair appeared to jokingly tweet that she wanted to get Musk's attention for a marriage proposal. Trump's now Deputy Rapid Response Director, Greg Price, replied to St. Clair at the time, he's got a kid with a woman already, seems unlikely to work out. Then, according to that same screenshot, St. Clair appeared to write, well, he actually has 7 kids and goes through women pretty fast. Musk responded in the present day to the screenshots on Saturday with a single word, whoa. A now deleted tweet, St. Clair had responded to Musk by writing, Elon, we've been trying to communicate for the past several days. You have not responded. When are you going to reply to us instead of publicly responding to smears from an individual who just posted photos of me in underwear at 15 years old? The New York Post interviewed St. Clair after the announcement, and she told the Post, quote, Musk was very funny, he was smart, he was very down to earth, started with X interactions, and he slid into my DMs. I think it was a meme.
The alleged romance apparently ignited after the Babylon Bee CEO asked St. Clair, who used to work for the outlet, to fly to San Francisco to interview Musk. St. Clair told the Post, after the interview, I got a text from him saying, feel like going to Providence, Rhode Island tonight?
St. Clair says she was told to keep it a secret forever. Musk allegedly bought her a fancy apartment in New York's financial district and a security detail.
The romance, however, was allegedly not there. St. Clair says she spent the pregnancy alone.
So this is some news. Elon Musk obviously has a number of children. One of his little rugrats was with him at the Oval Office the other day. I guess I should say that it is not totally independently confirmed that he is in fact the father of this child, because he has not acknowledged it or said so, but that is her claim, and she clearly did meet him and got a apartment paid for by him. That's, again, according to reporting the New York Post did. Tweeting at Elon is the best way to get his attention, so I see why she is doing it that way. Look, I don't, in all seriousness, I think it's a little bit not great to watch, two parents. This is going to be embarrassing to the kid later on in life.
100%.
I also want to leave kids out of things, have kids be off limits. The baby is too young to have an awareness now of even what is going on, but it's good not to involve kids in public squabbles. So I think it was not a good idea on her part. It's one thing to just release a statement saying this is the situation and I want privacy and that's all, but then to be tweeting about it or tweeting to try to get his attention, I don't think is a good idea. I similarly don't think it was good judgment on his part to ignore her and then respond to a screenshot of a tweet of a conversation from long ago saying that she was trying to ensnare him. Although that is kind of interesting that she said that all those years ago. So not ideal behavior from these new parents.
Not ideal, and I am judging it, Robby, with
Are you?
every breath this morning.
Are
it's
you?
Almost as if they mistook their X accounts for their text message inboxes. This is the kind of stuff you definitely should be keeping between the individuals who are involved. And I mean, I take your point about the impact on the kids long term very, very seriously. This is going to live on forever. I mean, even when people delete their posts, they have existed. Not good.
Yeah, it's also, I don't know, it seems like there could be financial consequences for doing that, but if it is his child, he should support. I mean, he has supported her already. He got her this apartment. I was not even though that she's a right-wing kind of content creator on X. It's a popular account. I've seen the account before. I've not really interacted with her very much or at all. I don't know her. I do know Greg Price, who was briefly involved in this, whose tweet we put on screen, who now works for the Trump administration and tweets very prolifically, and we've used a lot of his tweets on the show. He provides a useful service of identifying interesting content to discuss. So anyway, it's all very online. It's I guess is this how people meet and fall in love and decide to have kids now?
Well, maybe they do.
You get an online billionaire's attention, and then he flies you across the country, and then you see how that date turns out?
Yeah, look, Robby, the bigger question for me is, Mr. Musk is now a very outsized figure within the Republican Party, the party of family values.
Okay, we can go there. Go ahead.
How is it that this is okay to father many children by any standards under multiple women? I mean, this is the thing.
Well, I'm not a social conservative, so I don't care whatsoever. Frankly, it doesn't seem like conservatives too much care whatsoever. I've seen a couple tweets from people on the right saying effectively, is this sending the right sign? Isn't this inconsistent with our one man, one woman, stable family situation, advocacy, etc.? Mostly I was just seeing people on the right congratulating her and him for having another kid. His situation is he is so wealthy he can provide for a good accommodations for a child. It's not like the child is going to go hungry or be neglected I mean maybe you could argue that be emotionally neglected or in some way will be psychologically worse off for this, but it's not going to be it's like a single parent, family, household level of neglect.
Yeah, I mean, look, personally, I'm kind of a live and let live gal. Yeah, however,
me too. I don't care.
The political point here is, if this were a Dem who were in his shoes under the same circumstances, there would be no end to the skewering on that, right-wing media infrastructure.
I don't know about that.
I think
so.
Yeah, I do. I feel like it would be fodder for a lot of different conversations.
Well, I mean, Republicans have gotten chiller about a lot of that stuff. It's not exactly what are now socially conservative or family issues. It's not really abortion and marriage and those kinds of things. It's wokeness is more of a transgender stuff and pronouns and those kinds of things. It's just a different set of issues.
Robby, I think you are far more open-minded than the Republican Party.
Oh.
And in particular, I would say abortion remains a total linchpin issue. The only breathing room that we are seeing right now, I think, is as a result of the now second-time president having pushed back on abortion as part of his campaign. But I do think that remains a central tenet of the culture.
Well, no doubt it remains important to many social conservatives, of which there is still a large and healthy movement. But as you said, Trump has not prioritized the issue. He said there should be no federal, no national abortion policy, that it's up to the states. And even red-leaning states have not shown much inclination to pass incredibly restrictive abortion rules.
Which to me felt like a political strategy as opposed to wherever his beliefs may be, because it took the air out of the tires on some of what was really driving people and getting Democrats.
Well, unlike the Democratic Party, the Republican Party has pivoted to doing things that are only broadly popular, right? Trump has actually ran against cutting entitlements, even though I absolutely want to cut entitlements. He's like, that's not popular. We're not going to do that. He's running on things like, as we talked about earlier, like the cultural stuff that wins. Like there can only be 2 genders on the form or with the government paperwork. That has majority American support, so that's what we're going to do. Having incredibly restrictive abortion policies would not have majority support, so we're not going to do that.
Well,
maybe Democrats could listen to some of that.
Maybe his influence is now also impacting Elon Musk, and people are less concerned about it than maybe they would have been in a past cycle.
Well, we wish do we know this kid's name? Is production was that released? The kid's name?
God,
the kid's name is XXX. No, you're lying. They're joking. That's a joke.
Just
because some of the other kids had interesting names.
Letters and numbers.
Some of them, letters and numbers. That does it for us today on Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can find podcasts. See you tomorrow.